This is Iran, a nation on the brink, not just economically and politically, but existentially. For over 4 decades, this man, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has held absolute power, guiding Iran with an iron fist and fiery rhetoric against the West. But his grasp is slipping rapidly.
دولتی مذاکره نباید کرد. مذاکره کردن عاقلانه نیست، هوشمندانه نیست.
We will not only win the war, working together, we will win the peace. With your leadership, Mr. President, and our partnership, I believe that we will forge a brilliant future for our region and bring our great alliance to even greater heights.
Today, the Ayatollah faces threats unlike any he has faced before, both from outside Iran and from within. On one front, the United States and Israel are reuniting around a single explicit goal, completely dismantling Iran's nuclear ambitions while breaking up its axis of resistance. But here's the twist. What if Iran already had a nuclear capability that the West already fears? A hidden prototype bomb, ready but undeclared. If true, this could change everything, triggering scenarios we've only seen in war games and diplomatic nightmares. And yet, even with potential nuclear deterrence, Iran's influence abroad is collapsing. Its most powerful proxy has bleeding in Lebanon, financially drained and politically isolated. And in Syria, Assad, one of Iran's strongest allies, has fled to Moscow. Meanwhile, internally, the pressures are boiling. The Iranian economy is near collapse, crippled by sanctions, corruption, and mismanagement. The people are restless, exhausted by poverty, repression, and isolation. And perhaps most crucially, Ayatollah Khamenei himself, now in his mid-80s, is visibly declining in health. As his strength fades, the question of who will succeed him and whether they can hold the nation together is becoming critical. In Washington and Tel Aviv, plans are accelerating, designed not only to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions, but to strike at the heart of its economic power, its energy sector. The goal, of course, is to force a reckoning, one that can topple the regime from within. So is this the beginning of the end for the Ayatollah's reign in Iran? Could we soon witness a moment that not just changes Iran forever, but also the Middle East and perhaps the world? To truly understand why the Ayatollah's days might be numbered, we have to first understand exactly what the United States and Israel are afraid of. Iran acquiring nuclear weapons isn't just another geopolitical issue. It's considered a catastrophic scenario, a red line neither nation is willing to cross. But why is that? If Iran were to go nuclear, the balance of power in the Middle East would shift dramatically. Israel, which has long maintained nuclear ambiguity, sees a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat, a direct challenge to its own security and survival. And the US? For Washington, a nuclear-armed Iran would destabilize the entire region, sparking an arms race in neighboring countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt. That nightmare scenario doesn't end with just weapons. It's about influence. A nuclear Iran would feel emboldened, increasing its funding and support for groups the West labels as terrorist organizations. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. The strategic nightmare? A Middle East engulfed in proxy wars fueled by a nuclear-backed confidence from Iran. But the goal here isn't simply to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. It's total denuclearization. The US and Israel are aligned not just on limiting uranium enrichment, curbing capabilities, but on dismantling every aspect of Iran's nuclear program down to its very foundations. However, this strategy isn't just military, it's economic. The heart of Iran's economy lies in its oil and energy sectors. This is its lifeline for survival. The US and Israel aim to squeeze this lifeline until Tehran has no choice but to capitulate. They see sanctions, sabotage, and cyber attacks as tools to cripple Iran's economic engine and force regime change from within, at least outside of an armed conflict. But during an armed conflict, these are key targets for them to go after. For years, Iran has projected power throughout the Middle East through proxy groups across the region, especially Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shiite militias in Iraq, Hamas in Gaza, and the Assad regime in Syria. But today, cracks are appearing, and Washington and Tel Aviv see an opportunity. Hezbollah is financially and structurally drained, devastated by a costly war against Israel that left virtually the entire leadership dead. Assad's regime in Syria is gone, with Assad himself recently fleeing to Russia, a stunning setback for Iranian ambitions. The US and Israel now envision something once thought of to be a far-off possibility in the distant future, now closer than ever before: the total collapse of Iran's network of regional regional influence. If Hezbollah falls once and for all, and Syria remains outside of Iran's grasp, Iran loses its strategic footholds. This isn't just about weakening Tehran, it's about eradicating its geopolitical leverage entirely. So these twin objectives, the total dismantling of Iran's nuclear ambitions and the collapse of its axis of resistance, are now openly discussed in the halls of power from Washington to Jerusalem. But can it actually be achieved? And if so, at what cost? To fully grasp the danger looming in Iran's future, we must dive into the intricate nature of its nuclear program, a story defined by ambition, secrecy, and escalating tensions. Iran's nuclear ambitions began as early as the 1950s under the Atoms for Peace initiative, initially supported by the United States. But the revolution in 1979 changed everything, plunging the program into secrecy and suspicion. By the early 2000s, the discovery of secret nuclear sites, like those of Natanz in Iraq, set alarm bells ringing around the world, igniting fears that Iran was getting closer and closer to nuclear weapons capability. This led to the landmark 2015 nuclear agreement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, which sought to limit Iran's nuclear progress through strict oversight. But this diplomatic achievement was very shortly lived. Since 2018, Iran has rapidly expanded its nuclear capabilities. By 2023, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that Iran had enriched uranium to 60% purity, dangerously close to the 90% threshold needed for nuclear weapons. Central to these developments is the Natanz facility, Iran's largest uranium enrichment site. Despite repeated cyber attacks and sabotage attempts, by late 2024, Natanz housed approximately 14,000 centrifuges, 11,000 actively enriching uranium. This came with additional reports that Iran is weeks away from developing its first nuclear weapons, with the final decision still yet to be made by the Ayatollah. Equally concerning is the Fordow fuel enrichment plant hidden deep inside a mountain near Qom. Once a closely guarded secret, Fordow became known globally in 2009, and by early 2023, inspectors discovered uranium enriched to nearly 84% purity, marking a new alarming milestone. Then of course there's the Parchin military complex, long suspected of housing secret weaponization efforts. Despite Tehran's claims of purely conventional use, traces of uranium detected by inspectors in 2015 have kept suspicions high. The cumulative effect of these developments signals one clear message: Iran is rapidly approaching a nuclear weapons capability, altering the strategic calculus for the entire Middle East and beyond. For decades, Iran has projected its power through an intricate network known as the Axis of Resistance, an alliance of armed groups and militias spanning Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Gaza. But today that network is showing deep cracks, weakened significantly by recent seismic events across the region. Let's start with Hezbollah in Lebanon, which was once Iran's most powerful proxy. For years, Hezbollah dominated Lebanon's politics and posed a direct threat to Israel's northern border. But the devastating Israeli-Hezbollah conflict changed everything. In a swift and ruthless campaign, Israel eliminated much of Hezbollah's senior leadership and decimated its military forces, severely crippling the group's operational capabilities. It is, of course, still armed and dangerous, it's just a shell of its former self. This wasn't just a tactical blow to Hezbollah, it was existential. Hezbollah's political influence collapsed among popular anger, triggered by economic hardship and the catastrophic toll of the conflict. Today, Lebanon's once powerful militia is a shadow of its former self, struggling to maintain internal stability, let alone project power abroad. Then there's Syria, which was once the linchpin of Iran's regional strategy, which was heavily reliant on Iranian support, has now crumbled. Assad himself recently fled Syria to Iran, signaling a catastrophic defeat for Tehran's ambitions. Without Assad, Iran's strategic bridge to Hezbollah and the Mediterranean coast is effectively severed. But despite those losses, Iran's proxies elsewhere remain dangerous. In Yemen, the Houthis continue their relentless war against Saudi Arabia and its allies. With Iranian backing, they've launched missiles and drone attacks, destabilizing vital energy markets and threatening global oil routes throughout the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait. In Iraq, various Iranian-backed militias, notably Kataib Hezbollah and Asaib al-Haq, still wield substantial influence. These groups regularly target U.S. forces and assets, fueling instability and undermining Iraqi sovereignty. Their ongoing attacks have kept tensions high, constantly risking a broader conflict. The real danger emerges, however, whenever you combine these scattered yet resilient groups with Iran's accelerating nuclear program. If Tehran acquires nuclear weapons, these proxies wouldn't just be empowered, they'd be emboldened. Protected by a nuclear umbrella of their Iranian patron, they could launch more daring and aggressive attacks, confident that major retaliation against Iran itself is almost impossible. The scenario is, of course, chilling. Regional conflicts escalating unchecked, global energy markets shaken, and major powers drawn into a potentially devastating confrontation. This is precisely why the United States and Israel remain laser focused, not just on stopping Iran's nuclear ambitions, but dismantling its network of influence completely. Yet even weakened, the axis of resistance is not yet broken. The stakes remain incredibly high. The question isn't just of how to confront Iran, it's how to prevent the network from igniting a much larger conflict. While existential threats mount for Iran, there's another critical factor that is placing immense pressure on Iran's future: the deteriorating health of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now in his mid-80s, Khamenei's health has become one of the most closely guarded secrets in Iran, fueling speculation and uncertainty about the nation's future leadership. Over recent years, intelligence reports and eyewitness accounts have pointed to a steady decline in Khamenei's condition. Rumors suggest that he has battled prostate cancer and heart disease, frequently undergoing medical procedures behind closed doors. Every absence from public view, no matter how brief, sparks renewed speculation about whether the end of his regime is indeed imminent. The Ayatollah's uncertain health has thrust the succession question into focus. Iran's political landscape is notoriously opaque, yet a handful of political figures have emerged as possible successors. Each bring their own ideological leanings and ambitions to the table. Ibrahim Raisi, the former president, was often cited as the front runner. A hardline conservative known for his loyalty to the revolutionary principles, Raisi had climbed the ranks rapidly, securing positions of immense influence. In a twist of misfortune for Iran, Raisi died in a helicopter accident while returning from a visit from Azerbaijan in 2024. Another intriguing and controversial candidate is Mojtaba Khamenei, the Ayatollah's second son. Mojtaba commanded significant influence within Iran's powerful Revolutionary Guard and intelligence services. Though less publicly visible, his behind-the-scenes power makes him certainly a much more formidable, albeit more polarizing candidate. Then there's Hassan Rouhani, a moderate figure who previously negotiated the nuclear deal with Western powers. Rouhani represents a potential shift back towards dialogue and engagement with the West. However, his moderate approach faces fierce resistance, especially amongst the hardline establishment, making his path to leadership uncertain. He's also much older than Mojtaba, with Hassan being 76 and Mojtaba being 20 years younger. Whichever successor rises to power will inherit a deeply divided Iran, one facing extraordinary existential and internal pressures. The balance of power, ideological direction, and Iran's relationship with the world will hinge significantly on this transition. For the United States, Israel, and the entire Middle East, the choice of Iran's next leader could either open doors for diplomatic engagement or lock in decades of hostility and conflict. As Khamenei's health fades, the world watches closely, because Iran's next move, its next leader, could redefine everything. Beyond the Ayatollah's fragile health and the chaos of succession, there lies yet another powerful threat to Iran's regime, one emerging not from external forces, but from within the nation itself. Iran's economy is in freefall. Decades of sanctions, mismanagement, corruption, and isolation have devastated the Iranian people. Inflation has soared to nearly 50%. Unemployment among youth has reached staggering heights, and shortages in basic necessities is very common. The once vibrant middle class has been completely hollowed out, replaced by growing poverty and frustration. This economic pain has boiled into widespread civil unrest. Perhaps the most explosive example occurred recently, when massive protests erupted over the regime's oppressive policies against women. Sparked by the brutal enforcement of strict hijab laws and systemic discrimination, millions of Iranians, particularly young women and young people in general, took to the streets demanding freedom and change. The regime responded harshly, cracking down with brutal force, leading to hundreds killed and thousands more arrested.
acid.
Yet, despite these ruthless efforts to silence dissent, the fissures within Iranian society remain wide open. Public anger continues to simmer just beneath the surface, creating fertile ground for instability. And this internal unrest is exactly what the United States and Israel see as an opportunity. If external pressures alone aren't enough to topple the Ayatollah, then perhaps internal turmoil could be the tipping point. Both nations recognize that an Iran internally divided by economic despair and demands for social change cannot effectively resist international pressure. Already, intelligence and cyber operations have sought to amplify these divisions, using technology and social media to empower dissidents and spread information that the regime desperately tries to suppress. For Israel and the US, these internal struggles are not just representative of a vulnerability, but are a strategic asset, leveraging Iranian citizens' genuine grievances to facilitate regime change from within. Yet the Iranian regime knows this threat well. Tehran is tightening its grip, expanding its surveillance capabilities, and escalating crackdowns in a desperate bid to maintain control. But history shows us that when a population reaches its breaking point, no amount of force can indefinitely suppress the demand for freedom and dignity. As economic conditions deteriorate and social frustrations deepen, Iran stands precariously close to yet another major uprising, one that could shake the foundations of its authoritarian regime. The stakes are immense. A single spark could ignite the flames of a full-scale revolution, potentially reshaping not just Iran's future, but that of the entire regions. Faced with escalating nuclear threats, regional instability, and the growing internal unrest, the United States and Israel appear to be preparing for decisive actions designed to confront and potentially topple the Ayatollah regime. Recently, President Donald Trump sent a stark and uncompromising letter directly to Ayatollah Khamenei. Trump's message was clear: Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions immediately or face consequences aimed directly at dismantling the regime itself. But the Ayatollah's response was swift and defiant. He declared unequivocally that Iran will never bow to US pressure, vowing that the nation's nuclear ambitions would continue without interruption. This standoff has raised tensions to unprecedented levels, signaling that diplomatic options are rapidly closing. Trump later said this:
Situation with Iran, that something's going to happen very soon, very, very soon. You'll be talking about that pretty soon, I guess. And hopefully we can have a peace deal. You know, I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other, but the other will solve the problem.
Meanwhile, the US and Israel have intensified their military cooperation, preparing for scenarios from targeted strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities to broader military operations aimed at crippling Iran's strategic assets. Joint training exercises have dramatically increased, with both nations preparing for potential conflicts. Trump and Israeli leadership have explicitly highlighted Iran's energy sector as a primary target. By crippling Iran's oil and gas infrastructure, its economic lifeline, they aim to choke off the revenue stream that's critical for the regime's survival. Trump's recent statements underscore this strategy, promising a swift, decisive campaign not only to halt Iran's nuclear program, but to bring about the regime's collapse. Yet despite this overwhelming external pressure, the Ayatollah continues to gamble on defiance. His regime believes that they can withstand international isolation and military threats. But history is often unkind to leaders who underestimate the combined force of internal rebellion and external confrontation. Today, the world watches closely. Will Iran abandon its nuclear ambitions and chart a path toward peace, or will the Ayatollah's unwavering defiance push the region towards war? One thing is certain: the status quo cannot hold much longer. A potential conflict is looming large over this region, and both President Trump and President Netanyahu appear hell-bent on making sure that this ends on their terms. And the outcome of this conflict could reshape the Middle East for generations. Thank you for watching. This is a slightly different format from my recent videos. This is something that I've kind of wanted to play around with and that I plan on kind of playing around with a little bit in the future, so let me know what you think about this. Also, let me know what you think about what's going to happen next with Iran. Do you think that the Ayatollah will be around to see 2026? And what do you think that the impact that all of this will have on Iran and on the region? Like this video if you found it to be interesting, and of course share it with a friend. And subscribe for more videos just like this and deeper analysis on other topics. Until that, I'll see you all next time.